Hello everybody, welcome back to another video lesson for 6th grade history. This is going to be the first one for most of you for the new year. Some of you guys will be seeing this a little bit later in the year as well. So hello to you for whatever time you are watching this video and learning about the Civil War. Yes, that is right. The last few days we've been talking about the introduction to our Civil War unit, and today we are going to get into some of the nitty-gritty of when the states that wanted to be wanted to keep slavery decided to leave the Union and form their own nation known as the Confederate States of America. We've heard about this, I'm sure, at some point throughout our lives. We've heard of the Confederacy, or at least have talked about it in some way, shape, or form, hopefully. So moving into this, hopefully the information will be new, but maybe some of the terms will be slightly more familiar for you as well. The last couple days, we've talked about two particular topics. The first one that we talked about our reasons of differences between the North and the South. There were many different types of differences. We had things like government, we had things like culture, issues like slavery and the economy, all of which the northern states and the southern states just could not agree on, and that's going to, like I've mentioned before, kind of contribute to our boiling pot of water and our boiling pot of tensions and anger that is going to end up overflowing into what we know as the Civil War. And then, of course, yesterday, and we also talked a bit about some of the compromises that were made between the northern states and the southern states. Remember, a compromise is where a solution is come up about a disagreement, but neither side gets 100% of what they wanted. One side has to give up something, both sides have to give up something. They make a deal where not everybody gets everything, but everybody gets something out of the deal that they were trying to strike. So we've talked about our issues between the North and the South, and then we've talked about the compromises that were made in order to solve some of those issues. What we're going to move into now, though, is, like I said, the secession, or the states that decide to leave the Union, leave the United States of America, and create their own nation. And this is actually going to be where your notes are going to start, ladies and gentlemen. So there's going to be one event in 1860 that is going to be known as kind of the straw that broke the camel's back. It was the last thing that was put on top of it before everything collapsed, and that would be our election of 1860, all right? The election of 1860. During this election, guys, there was actually 4 people who ran for president during this election because of how strong different opinions were on how to deal with the issue of slavery, okay? So we're getting to the point where people in the North are fed up with it, our abolitionists are fed up with slavery, but people in the South who are working on plantations or making cash crops, they're relying on this slave labor in order to keep their economy going. So these difference in ideas is actually going to cause 4 different people to run, and I'm going to list those off for you right now. First off, from the Republican Party, we have Abraham Lincoln, Abe Lincoln. We've talked about him, in other parts, not in history class, this history class at least anyways, but we've talked about him in school before, probably during elementary school at some point. We should know who Abraham Lincoln is. On the $5 bill, he's on the penny, and we're going to be talking about him a lot during this unit, starting here and moving forward. So the Republican Party was Abe Lincoln. Then you've got the Constitutional Union Party, a man named John Bell was running for them. The Northern Democratic Party, a man named Stephen Douglas, was running for them. And then finally, the Southern Democratic Party, we've got John Breckinridge. Now notice I said a lot more information about Abe Lincoln than I did the other 3. Why is this? Well, Abe Lincoln's the winner of the election, so he's going to be the name that everyone is going to remember for the rest of United States history because he becomes the president and he becomes an important member, important historical member, as you will see as the Civil War goes on, okay? So make sure that part of your notes is filled in, and it does have a direction on there for you to highlight that winner of the 1860 election, so make sure you have highlighted the Republican Party with Abe Lincoln on your note sheets. Let's dig in a little bit more into Abe Lincoln's life, though, and into his beliefs and why he was a great candidate for this job and what he believed in that ended up in him winning the election. So Lincoln didn't want to get rid of slavery in states where it already existed. So we're talking those southern states who are relying on the slaves for labor, okay? He didn't want to get rid of it where it was already existing, okay? Instead, he very much opposed it spreading to new territories. Remember, guys, yesterday we talked about things like the Missouri Compromise. We talked about the Compromise of 1850. We talked about the Kansas-Nebraska Act, all of which were historical events in United States history that have to do with the issue of slavery. And in those compromises, it was allowed for slavery to spread into new states being admitted into the Union. Lincoln wants to stop this. He's going to be like, okay, if you already have slavery, cool, keep it. That's fine. But it's not going to spread anywhere else. He didn't want it to go to other parts of the country. Once Lincoln is elected, though, after the election of 1860, several southern states were a little bit more afraid of what Lincoln might do to the policy of slavery, and they decided to leave the Union, or to secede from the Union. And you'll see there on your note sheet, you got a little bullet point that says, to secede means to leave a group. So if you think of the United States, it's a group of states, and these southern states in particular were unhappy with the way that it was being run, so they decided that they were going to leave and create their own nation, and this is going to be called the Confederate States of America, or the Confederacy. Now, it all has to start with one, so who was the first state that decided to leave? South Carolina. You might want to star that, highlight it, circle it in some way, shape, or form, because something tells me that that may come up on a test later down the line. So the first to leave was South Carolina. Now, when you have, your beliefs between your Northerners and your Southerners, there are going to be stark differences in beliefs about who can leave and when, okay? Lincoln and the Northerners, many Northerners, believed that the United States was just one nation, and it could not be separated, it could not be divided. Once you are in, you are in. There's nothing else you can do. On the other hand, though, Southerners believed that it was the states who had freely created the Union. We created the Constitution. We had signed the Constitution. Nobody forced us to sign it. So it should be that states were able to freely leave it as well. So Southerners believed that states could freely leave the Union since they freely entered it. Northerners believed that the United States at all costs should be kept together and preserved as one union of states. Okay? So that's going to be two of some of the biggest differences that we see in the beliefs about seceding from a group of states. This created a movement, once South Carolina left, created a movement of southern states that leave the United States of America to create their own nation, like I mentioned before, and they try to create the Confederate States of America in 1861. This is successful for a time, and it ends up leading to the Civil War, which obviously we know the Union ends up winning, Confederate states get dissolved, but I'm getting ahead of myself. We're not going to talk about any of that for a couple of weeks. What we need to talk about right now is the creation of the Confederacy. So we're going to need to break down all of the names of our states into the three different groups that we have. We have Union states, which are mainly northern states that decided to stay with the Union. We have border states, which are the states along the border of that 3630 line that we had talked about yesterday, who already had slavery but didn't want to leave the Union. They were still going to stay with the North, but they were also still going to practice their slave trade and their usage of slaves for labor. Then you've got your southern states or your Confederate states that want to leave the Union and create their own nation. So we're going to break these down into all three of those groups, actually starting with the list of states that seceded or left the United States of America. So these are southern states that were dependent upon labor-intensive cash crops, things like tobacco, cotton, indigo, those three things that we had talked about back from the colonies. And they thought that they needed slavery to keep producing them. So here's a list of the states that seceded from the Union. You can see we've got Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, which if you remember I had mentioned was the first, Georgia, Florida, Texas, Alabama, Mississippi, Tennessee, Arkansas, and Louisiana. I would suggest pausing the video here to take a look at the list and make sure that you have the correct spelling of the state names as well as their acronyms that you see posted in the video right next to their name. Next, ladies and gentlemen, we have our list of border states. So like I said, those are the states that are on the border between the North and the South, and they had slavery, but they decided, nah, we're not going to leave the Union. We're going to stay with the United States. So this group is going to be their own group called border states. These consist of the following 4 states: Missouri, Kentucky, Maryland, and Delaware. All of these were states that already practiced slavery, but did not want to leave the Union. And then finally, ladies and gentlemen, we've got our big list of Union states. These are northern states, free states that decided not to secede, not to leave, and stay with the Constitution, stay with the United States of America. Those are as follows: California, Connecticut, Illinois, Indiana, Iowa, Kansas, Maine, Massachusetts, Michigan, Minnesota, New Hampshire, New Jersey, New York, Ohio, Oregon, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, Vermont, West Virginia, and Wisconsin. That's a lot of them, but those are the states that decided not to leave the Union. They decided to stay and preserve the United States and fight for the North because they believed in the abolishment of slavery as well. The last thing, ladies and gentlemen, that we need to talk about before we are done with today's video is actually a special case, which was West Virginia. Did you guys notice that this list is actually the first time that we've talked about the state of West Virginia? That's because it becomes a state right before the Civil War. There were certain counties in Western Virginia, right? Not West Virginia yet, but Western Virginia, the whole landmass by itself. There were certain counties which are much different than Eastern Virginia that also did not believe in slavery. So instead of just going along with the rest of Virginia and seceding and leaving the Union, they actually took it a step further and seceded from their own state and created what we now know as West Virginia, a state that still exists today. And they ended up joining the Union, whereas Virginia ended up joining the Confederacy. All right, I know that's a lot of information, ladies and gentlemen, especially the state names. So my suggestion for you is to take a couple minutes right now, go back to at least the names, the list of names, make sure you have everything labeled in your note sheet correctly, and when you are finished, you may come back to rejoin us in the conference.